One sunny afternoon, I was walking along a creek when I had no idea that my life was about to change forever. My name is Sarah, and this is the story of how a moment of curiosity led to the biggest mistake of my life. The air felt fresh and had the scent of wildflowers and grass. I often took walks here to clear my head, but today, something caught my eye: a beautiful chestnut horse grazing in a nearby pasture. Its coat glistened in the sunlight. One sunny afternoon, I was walking along a creek when I saw a beautiful horse. I often took walks there to clear my head, and that day was no different. I saw the horse grazing in a nearby pasture. Its chestnut coat was shiny in the sunlight. I found myself drawn to the fence as I approached the horse. It lifted its head and looked at me with gentle, intelligent eyes. Its gaze was so calm and inviting that I climbed over the wooden fence without thinking. I sank slightly into the soft earth on the other side, but the horse didn't shy away. Instead, it stood. I felt the sunlight on my skin as I got closer to the horse. It lifted its head and looked at me with gentle, intelligent eyes. Its gaze was so calm and inviting that I didn't think twice before getting closer. I climbed over the wooden fence, my shoes sinking slightly into the soft earth on the other side. The horse didn't move away as I walked up to it. Instead, it stood still, as if waiting for me. I reached out my hand, marveling at how soft its coat felt beneath my fingers. I'd never been this close to a horse before, and I was amazed by its size and strength. Yet despite its powerful build, there was a gentleness to it that put me at ease. As I ran my hand along its side, the horse seemed to enjoy the attention. Its ears were relaxed, and it let out a soft snort that I took as a sign of contentment. The horse was perfect. It was still as if it were waiting for me. I reached out my hand, amazed at how soft its coat felt. I'd never been this close to a horse before. I was amazed by its size and strength. But despite its powerful build, there was a gentleness to it that made me feel at ease. As I ran my hand along its side, the horse seemed to enjoy the attention. Its ears were relaxed, and it let out a soft snort that I took as a sign of contentment. I decided to explore further, emboldened by its calm demeanor. My hand moved lower, and that's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. Hanging between the horse's back legs was what I assumed to be its genitals. I know it sounds naive now, but at the time, I didn't know much about horse anatomy. I was curious, and before I could talk myself out of it, I reached out to touch it. The texture surprised me. It was softer than I expected. I was surprised by how firm it was on the outside, but I could feel something else beneath the surface. As I continued to explore with my fingers, I noticed it starting to change. The firmness I felt began to grow and extend. I was fascinated. I'd never seen anything like it, and I couldn't look away. It kept growing far larger than I ever would have imagined. By the time it stopped, it must have been at least a foot long. The horse won. I was surprised by how firm it felt. I kept exploring with my fingers and noticed it was changing. It got harder and bigger. I was fascinated. I'd never seen anything like it. I couldn't look away. It kept growing. By the time it stopped, it was at least a foot long. The horse moved its head, which I thought was a good sign. Looking back, I realized how silly my assumptions were. But at the time, I was too curious to think clearly. I squatted down to get a better look. I noticed the horse's testicles for the first time. They were much bigger than I expected. They were hanging low and heavy. Without thinking, I reached out to touch them. They felt warm and alive. I saw the horse's testicles, which were much larger than I expected. They were hanging low and heavy. I was too curious to think, so I reached out to touch them. They felt warm and alive, and I could feel a subtle movement inside that I couldn't explain. I kept exploring, and I noticed a clear, thick fluid beginning to emerge from the tip of the horse's penis. It was sticky and shiny, almost like honey. The more I touched it, the more of this fluid appeared, dripping down to form small puddles on the ground. In a moment of reckless curiosity, I decided to taste it. The flavor was surprisingly sweet. I was so caught up in the moment that I didn't notice someone approaching until it was too late. To my horror, I looked up to see my. It was like apples. I knew this was dangerous and wrong, but I didn't think about what might happen. I was too caught up in the moment to think about what might happen. More and more of the liquid came out. It was too much for me to handle. I couldn't keep it all in. Some of it came out of my mouth, and it was on the ground. The horse's private parts seemed to get bigger. They were stretching the space in my mouth. Suddenly, without warning, the horse started to ejaculate. It was so strong, and I couldn't stop it. It sprayed over my face and hair. I was soaked and sticky. In the middle of this chaos, I felt a rush of excitement and pleasure that I'm now ashamed of. I was so caught up in the moment that I didn't know someone was coming up to me until it was too late. I looked up to see all of a sudden, my horse started to ejaculate. I wasn't ready for it and I couldn't stop it. It sprayed over my face and hair, and I was soaked and sticky. I felt excited and happy, and now I feel embarrassed about it. I was so caught up in the moment that I didn't notice someone approaching until it was too late. I looked up and there was my husband, Jake, standing at the fence. His face showed that he was shocked and disgusted. "Sarah, what are you doing?" he said. His voice sounded shocked and angry. I understood what was happening. I stood up quickly, trying to wipe the mess off my face and clothes. "Jake, I can explain," I said, but even as I said it, I knew there was no explanation that could make this right. Jake's face showed that he was angry. Jake stood at the fence. His face showed shock, disgust, and anger. "What are you doing, Sarah?" he asked. "What's going on?" I asked, trying to wipe my face and clothes. "I can explain," I said. "Jake, I can explain," I said. Jake's face showed rage and pain. "Explain how you can explain this," he shouted. "I can't believe it. How could you do this?" I felt sick to my stomach. I felt the full weight of what I had done. "Jake, please. I'm sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. It just happened." Jake turned away. He was unable to look at me. "I don't know who you are anymore," he said, his voice breaking. This is," he said. It was disgusting. "I couldn't be around you right now." With that, he walked away, leaving me alone in the pasture. I sank to my knees, overwhelmed by shame and regret. How could I have done this? How could I have betrayed Jake's trust in such a horrible way? I stayed there for what felt like hours, crying until I had no tears left. The horse stood nearby, oblivious to the pain and chaos it had inadvertently caused. As the sun began to set, I made my way home, dreading what would come next. The days that followed were filled with arguments, tears, and painful silences. Jake moved out temporarily, saying he needed space to process what had happened. I threw myself into therapy, desperate to understand why I had acted so recklessly and determined to make sure it never happened again. Slowly, Jake and I began to rebuild our relationship. It wasn't easy. I went home, worried about what would happen next. The next few days were filled with arguments, tears, and painful quiet. Jake moved out for a while, saying he needed space to deal with what had happened. I started therapy to understand why I had acted so recklessly, and to make sure it didn't happen again. It was slow and painful, but Jake and I started to rebuild our relationship. There were times when I thought we wouldn't make it, when the hurt and betrayal seemed too much to overcome. But we kept going, taking it one day at a time. I promised myself and Jake that I would never do anything like that again. I avoided farms and pastures, turning away if I saw a horse in the distance. It was a constant reminder of my mistake, but also of my commitment to change. As weeks turned into months, I saw small signs of. There were times when I thought we wouldn't make it. There were times when the pain and betrayal seemed too much to overcome. But we persevered, taking it one day at a time. I made a solemn promise to myself and to Jake that I would never do anything like that again. I avoided farms and pastures, turning away if I saw a horse in the distance. It was a constant reminder of my mistake, but also of my commitment to change. As weeks turned into months, I saw small signs of progress. Jake began to soften towards me, though the pain was still evident in his eyes. We started couples therapy, working through our issues together. It was hard, often painful work, but I was determined to prove to Jake that I could be the wife he deserved. One night, about 6 months after the incident, Jake took my hand as we sat on the couch. "Sarah," he said softly, "I want you to know that I'm trying to forgive you. It's not easy and I'm still." Jake was trying to change, and I could see that. "I think we can get through this." I felt tears welling up in my eyes, but this time they were tears of hope and gratitude. I whispered, "Thank you, Jake. I promise I'll never let you down again." Now, I reflect on this journey and realize that I almost lost everything. My moment of weakness almost destroyed my marriage and my sense of self, but it also taught me valuable lessons about myself. "I'm hurt, but I see how hard you're working to change. I think we can get through this." Tears welled up in my eyes, but this time they were tears of hope and gratitude. "Thank you, Jake," I whispered. "I promise I'll never let you down again." As I reflect on this journey, I'm struck by how close I came to losing everything. My moment of weakness nearly destroyed my marriage and my sense of self, but it also taught me valuable lessons about self-control, the importance of communication in a relationship, and the power of forgiveness. I know that the road ahead won't be easy. There will always be a part of Jake that remembers what happened, and I'll carry the weight of my actions for the rest of my life. But I'm committed to moving forward, to being a better person and a better wife. If there's one thing I want others to take away from this, it's this: control the importance of communication in a relationship and the power of forgiveness. I know that the road ahead won't be easy. There will always be a part of Jake that remembers what happened, and I'll carry the weight of my actions for the rest of my life. But I'm committed to moving forward and being a better person and a better wife. If there's one thing I want others to take from my story, it's this: no matter how curious you might be, no matter what impulses you might feel, always consider the consequences of your actions. The momentary thrill is never worth the pain and damage it can cause to yourself and those you love. As for me, I'm focused on the future. Jake and I are slowly rebuilding our trust and intimacy. We're talking about starting a family. This seemed impossible after my mistake, but we're working on it. It shows how far we've come, and it gives me hope for the future. I know now that true happiness doesn't come from short-term excitement, or from doing things that are against the rules. It comes from the strong relationships we form with the people we love. It comes from being true to ourselves and our values, even though I fell hard, I'm grateful that I'm working on rebuilding trust with Jake. I know now that true happiness doesn't come from excitement or forbidden experiences. It comes from the bonds we form with the people we love and from being true to ourselves and our values, even when temptation arises. I'm committed to seeing my journey of healing and redemption through. Every day, I work to be the best version of myself, to honor Jake's forgiveness, and to build a future filled with love, trust, and mutual respect. As I write this, I'm reminded of a quote I once read: "The greatest glory in living lies not in never falling, but in rising every time." I'm working on my journey of healing and redemption. It's not over, but I'm committed to seeing it through. Every day, I try to be the best version of myself. I want to honor Jake's forgiveness and build a future full of love, trust, and mutual respect. As I write this, I'm reminded of a quote: "The greatest glory in living lies not in never falling, but in rising every time." We fall, and I fell hard. But I'm rising again, stronger and wiser than before. I'm grateful for that, despite all the pain and regret. The journey of rebuilding trust is never a straight path. As weeks turned into months, Jake and I continued to work on our relationship, but there were still moments of tension and doubt. I could see the pain lingering in his eyes, a constant reminder of, "We fall, but I get back up, stronger and wiser than before." I'm grateful for that, despite all the pain and regret. The journey of rebuilding trust is never a straight path. As weeks turned into months, Jake and I continued to work on our relationship, but there were still moments of tension and doubt. I could see the pain in his eyes, a constant reminder of my terrible mistake. One evening, after a particularly difficult therapy session, Jake turned to me with a serious expression. "Sarah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me," he said softly. My heart raced, but I nodded, of course. Jake took a deep breath before continuing. "Have you ever done anything like that?" Jake asked me a question that hit me hard. I knew it was coming, but it still hurt to hear it out loud. "Jake," I replied firmly, looking him directly in the eyes. "Never before and absolutely never since. What happened that day was a horrible, one-time mistake that I will regret for the rest of my life." Jake held my gaze for a long moment. Jake looked at me, and I could tell he was trying to tell me something. Finally, he nodded and said, "I believe you." Those 3 words meant more to me than I could express. It felt like a tiny crack in the wall of mistrust between us. I found myself reflecting more and more on what had led me to make such a terrible choice that day. In therapy, we explored issues I hadn't even realized were there. We talked about feelings of boredom in our marriage and my desire for excitement. I had some problems that I hadn't dealt with before. It wasn't easy to face these issues, but I knew it was important if we were ever going to move forward. Jake, on the other hand, was dealing with his own problems. He felt like he wasn't good enough, and my actions made him feel that way. He was also learning to trust again after a very bad betrayal. After a few months, things started to change. We didn't talk as much and we started to laugh together again, but not very much at first. Then, one night while we were washing dishes, we started to laugh more. We had always done chores together as a team, but everything fell apart. Jake flung some soap suds at me playfully. It was a small thing, but it felt like a huge step forward. However, just as things seemed to be improving, we hit another roadblock. Jake's brother was getting married. We had always done chores together, but now things had fallen apart. Jake flung some soap suds at me playfully. It was a small thing, but it felt like a huge step forward. However, just as things seemed to be improving, we hit another roadblock. Jake's brother was getting married, and the reception was to be held at a ranch. As soon as Jake told me, I felt a wave of panic wash over me. "I don't know if I can go," I stammered, my hands shaking as I sat down my coffee mug. Jake's face fell. "Sarah, it's my brother's wedding. We have to go, but there might be horses." Jake was going to a ranch for the wedding, and I felt worried. I felt embarrassed and I was ashamed. I looked at Jake and he looked at me. He looked upset and angry. He said, "Do you really think you can't control yourself around horses now?" I felt hurt by what he said, but I knew it was true. I tried to explain, "I'm afraid of how you'll react." I felt embarrassed and I was nervous. I was worried that Jake would be upset if he saw me around horses. Jake was quiet for a long moment. Then he reached out and took my hand. "Sarah, we can't avoid horses forever. At some point, we have to face this. Maybe this is that point." I nodded and tears ran down my cheeks. "You're right. I'll go. I promise I won't let you down." The day of the wedding arrived, and I was nervous as we drove to the ranch. I could feel the tension radiating from Jake when we arrived. I saw the stables in the distance and felt my stomach lurch. But as the day went on, something unexpected happened. I felt good around the horses, seeing them from a distance, hearing their occasional moos. It didn't make me want to do anything bad or feel ashamed. Instead, it made me feel more committed to Jake and our marriage. Every time I caught a glimpse of a horse, it reminded me of how much I was reminded of how I almost lost Jake, and it made me want to do better. Jake kept looking at me and the stables. Finally, as the sun was setting, he took my hand and said, "Let's go for a walk." My heart was beating really fast. I followed him. We walked in silence until we reached the fence of the horse pasture. A beautiful bay horse was grazing nearby. Jake turned to me, his eyes searching my face. "How do you feel right now?" he asked quietly. I took a deep breath and thought about my answer. I was grateful. I said, "I'm grateful for you, for us, for this." Jake had a chance to fix something, but he made a mistake. He said that he'll never make that mistake again, and he's happy to be with me now. His eyes got all wet, and he held me tightly. We stood there for a long time, holding each other. That day was an important step in our healing. It didn't fix everything, but it was a big step forward. In the months that followed, Jake and I worked on rebuilding trust. I tried to make our relationship better. We decided to be more open with each other. We shared our fears and insecurities instead of letting them build up. We also started to plan for our future again. We hadn't done that since before the incident. One evening, as we sat on our back porch and watched the sunset, Jake turned to me. He looked serious. "Sarah," he said, "I've been thinking. I think I'm ready to start trying for a baby." I felt my heart skip a beat. We had talked about having children before, but I had assumed that dream was lost. "Are we? You sure?" I asked, not wanting to hope. Jake nodded and smiled slightly. "I'm sure what happened was terrible, and it will always be a part of our story, but it's not our whole story. I love you, Sarah. I want to build a family with you." Tears of joy streamed down my face as I hugged Jake tightly. "I love you too, Jake. As I write this, I'm 6 months pregnant with our first child. It's been far from easy, and I know we'll face more challenges in the future, but I'm stronger now. I'm more self-aware, and I'm not the person I was on that fateful day by the creek. I'm more aware and grateful for the love and life I have. To anyone who might be tempted to give into a momentary impulse, no matter how exciting it might seem, I urge you to stop and think. Consider the potential consequences, not just for yourself but for those you love. A fleeting thrill is not worth the pain and heartache that can follow. To those who might be struggling to forgive a partner who has made a terrible mistake, if you're thinking about doing something impulsive, stop and think about the possible consequences. It's not worth it. If you're having trouble forgiving your partner for a mistake they made, I understand. It takes time and effort, but it's possible to rebuild trust and strengthen your relationship. I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be a worthy partner to Jake. I choose to be faithful, honest, and loving. Forgiveness is a journey, not a destination. It takes time, effort, and a willingness to be vulnerable. But if both parties are committed to healing and growth, it is possible to rebuild trust and create a relationship that is stronger than before. As for me, I'll spend the rest of my life making sure I'm worthy of the forgiveness and trust Jake has given me every day. I choose to be faithful, honest, and loving. Our marriage, our future, our family. The mistakes of our past don't have to define us. They can, if we let them. They can become the catalyst for profound change and growth. My moment of weakness nearly cost me everything, but it also led me to become a better, stronger person. It taught me the true value of love, trust, and forgiveness. As I feel our baby kick inside me, I'm filled with hope for the future. Jake and I have weathered a storm that our marriage, our future, our family. The mistakes of our past don't have to define us. They can, if we let them. They can be the catalyst for profound change and growth. My moment of weakness nearly cost me everything, but it also led me to become a better, stronger person. It taught me the true value of love, trust, and forgiveness. As I feel our baby kick inside me, I'm filled with hope for the future. Jake and I have weathered a storm that could have torn us apart, but instead it brought us closer together. We're not perfect and our relationship isn't perfect, but it's real, honest, and it's built on a foundation of love and mutual respect that's been tested and proven strong. Our story isn't over. In many ways it feels like it's just beginning, and I'm grateful for every moment, every challenge, every opportunity to show Jake and myself that love can truly conquer all.